Hello, everybody, and welcome to the session. I know more people are joining. It is the bottom of the hour. We do have a lot of exciting material to cover today, so we will go ahead and get started. So thank you so much for attending this session. I hope your morning, afternoon, or evening is off to a fantastic start and that you were able to attend the opening keynote this morning with Catherine Finney. It was a really inspiring presentation. So my name is Margaret Kelleher, and I am delighted to host this session for you today and introduce our speaker, Laura Foley of Laura M. Foley Design. Laura is a professional presentation designer. She helps her clients with developing presentation goals, ideas and outlines, script writing, storyboarding, and slide design. She also rescues problem presentations that her clients are struggling with. So please help me welcome the cheater of death by PowerPoint, Laura Foley.
Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for all over the world. I'm Laura Foley, and for a little over an hour, I am going to be talking to you about presentation design and how you can make your presentations work well, even if you're presenting them remotely. Before I go into the actual presentation itself, I wanted to do a little housekeeping because one of the main goals of my presentation is that you'll be engaged with what I'm saying and with each other. And I'm going to give you some tools to help make that happen. This is not going to be a talking head webinar. I'm not just going to blab and you're just going to sit there and listen. What I've done is I've designed some interactivity in so that you can ask me questions and I can ask you questions. And here's how that's going to work. Down at the bottom of your screen, you should see some version of chat, raise hand, Q&A. If you don't have raise hand right there, it might be under the participants window that you can open up. It might look a little different for you if you're looking at this on a PC or on a tablet or on your phone. This is a Mac screenshot. But you should have, yes, a chat, raise hand, and Q&A that you can find. You'll be using the raise hand functionality when I ask you to raise your hand. And when you see a slide that looks like this, you can raise your hand. When you see that slide, I'm going to ask you a yes or no question. So yes is raise hand, no is no response. With me so far? I'm going to be giving you a lot of information, and I am sure that you'll have some questions as I go along. When you see a slide that looks like this, that has a picture on the top and an orange band at the bottom, that is when I'm going to stop presenting and ask questions, or rather answer your questions. You can ask me a question by clicking on the Q&A button and typing your question in the Q&A. And if you do have another question, if you do have a question, you can, well, let me back up. There is the chat window, of course, and you can chat amongst yourselves. And we do have someone who is moderating the chat, but the questions that you have should go in Q&A. And if you do want to use that chat screen, you would click on chat. I would invite you to try to keep the chit chat among yourselves to a minimum so that you can be present in this meeting and learn from the examples that I'm giving, and hopefully take away some examples that you can bring back to your own work. All right, so that being said, this is Presentation Skills for Brainiacs. The point of this presentation is that you're going to learn how to create informative, clear, and entertaining virtual and in-person presentations that drive the results you want. Now I have my first question for you. Remember, you can click on raise hands. I want you to raise your hands, answer yes if you have limitless resources. You never need to explain or defend your work, and you don't have to sell anything, and you never have to pitch ideas. Raise your hands if that's true. Wow. Some of you are very fortunate. I can see that for some of you, it's like this, right? That people are just dumping money your way and saying you're great and everything's wonderful. Oh boy. Only 3 out of 175 people have answered yes, because probably it's more like this a lot of the time, right? We're asking for resources. We're asking people to validate our ideas. We're asking for funding. We always need to find new clients. We always need to communicate with existing ones, right? That's more the reality. So in order to make those persuasive asks and to help change people's opinions, you'll probably have to do a presentation at some point. We need to talk about our work. We have to communicate the value of what we do. And a way we do that is through our presentations. There are 5 reasons rather, that I've figured out that people usually present. We present to teach because we want people to know something or we want to demonstrate our mastery of a subject. We present to sell. So think of a sales pitch. We're trying to sell our products. We're trying to sell services. We present to entertain. Maybe we're doing a stage performance, or it's a poetry reading or something like that. That would be an example of an entertaining presentation. We present to inspire. We want people to do something. We want people to make a positive change, or maybe we want to tell them that they should be trying to be better than they are, something like that, inspirational speech. And we also try to convince people. This is when we're presenting to try to get people to change the mindset that they have and adopt a new mindset or be open to new ideas. So basically, those are the 5 reasons why we present. So because we have these reasons, when we start our presentations, this is what we say, right? We love being boring. No, that's not true. We don't shout up, we don't raise our hands and say we love doing boring presentations. I don't think any presenter really sets out to be boring, but sometimes that is what happens, is that they end up being boring by mistake, even though what they're talking about might be really interesting. Now, why does that happen? It happens because you've got a ton of information and it's so important, and everything about your subject is important. So you really want people to have all the information they can have so that they can make an informed decision, so that they know why you're asking them to do something like that. So when we try to dump too much information on people, we end up with slides that can look like this. This is a slide taken from an actual client deck. The names have been changed to protect the innocent. We end up with slides like this. A lot of good information, but so much of it. And we end up with slides like this. This is actually a pretty interesting slide that's got some very pertinent information that could save a company millions of dollars. But unless you spend time studying it, you really don't get that intensity of the message. When we do a data dump, when we have too much information, whatever you want to call it, when we have a lot of stuff that we're trying to tell people, it's like asking someone to drink from a fire hose. So when you're including things like technical jargon, lots of tables, lots of complicated ideas and facts, it's confusing. And people don't do much when they're confused. They get paralyzed because they might be busy trying to figure out what you're saying, trying to figure out what you want them to do. And because they don't know, they just lock down. And let's face it, some of these slide presentations can be boring. If it's just a recitation of facts or this continual stream of information and knowledge coming out, then it just gets to be dull. And another problem that I often see is that there's no call to action. In marketing, that's a call to action means you're telling the audience what you want them to do. So a call to action might be, please buy this service, or I hope that you understand now why you have to change doing this. It's what you want people to do. And if you just dump a bunch of information and assume people are going to understand what you want them to do, it's kind of like a mic drop, like boop, and then you walk away. People don't have a clear direction. At this point in the presentation, I will pause and ask Margaret, has anybody asked any questions so far?
Well, keep those questions coming. We do have one so far. One is, should I simplify my presentations when speaking to my peers?
What a great question. What I usually do is I help people to communicate with people who are not their peers. If you are delivering a presentation to your peers, say a work group, a business unit, and you're trying to keep them abreast of technical things that you're doing or high concept things that only they will understand, you can nerd out as much as you want. But
I think we did lose Laura for a minute as well. So let's hang on just a minute while we get the technical issue resolved. So thanks for your patience. I'm sure she'll be back just shortly. And thanks for the other questions that have come in. Keep those questions coming in. And while we're waiting for Laura to come back, how about in the chat, we talk about what do you struggle with the most when starting a new presentation? So we can keep the dialogue going even though Laura's not with us at the moment. I'll put that question in the chat. What do you struggle with most when starting a new presentation? Yeah, so some great suggestions coming in, trying to cater to the different ideas, giving enough information without overwhelming people, simplification of complicated concepts. That's easy to say, isn't it? So great. Know your audience. I think that's a really important one, is really knowing and understanding your audience will be helpful in terms of making sure that the message that you end up delivering is really relevant and pertinent for those folks that are listening to your presentation. Just a reminder too that we also have a closed captioning option. So if that is, if you are interested in that, the closed caption frame should appear at the bottom of the Zoom screen. So that option is available as well. So we got some other great comments coming in from folks about what they struggle with most when starting with a new presentation. So some other ones, modifying the same information to greatly different groups. So that's a challenge as well. Keeping it simple to the right audience, but providing enough context that if someone outside of the room saw it, they would understand. So great point, thank you. What other comments do we have coming in? How to present confidently without having too much content on the slides, and remember all that vast data which might be questioned during the presentation. Keeping in mind or realizing what the purpose of the presentation is. Often it's not obvious. These are great. Thank you everybody for sharing. For those doing technical presentations, I highly recommend great demo training, whether you do a demo or not. So Terry, thanks for calling that out. And Laura will be back in just a moment. Yeah, there she comes. So thank you for continuing the dialogue as we were waiting for Laura to return. I think you're on mute, Laura, so just make sure that you take your...
Okay.
There you go.
So thank you very much. All right, so now that you've had your chance to converse, let us start the part of my presentation where I'm going to give you 6 rules for great presentations. These are rules that I follow when I'm developing presentations of my own and when I'm working with my clients. Rule number 1 is to highlight benefits, not features. I'm going to go through these one at a time and then back up and slow down a bit. Rule number 2 is to focus on your audience, not on yourself. Rule number 3 is to tell stories and demonstrate. Number 4 is to plan well. Rule 5 is to edit, edit, edit. And rule 6 is to show energy, enthusiasm, and excitement when you're presenting. We'll start off with rule number 1, highlighting benefits and not features. This happy chappy is Mr. Skeptic. Mr. Skeptic is in everybody's audience, but he doesn't always ask the questions out loud. The questions are, so what, and what's in it for me? He doesn't ask you these questions directly, but he's always waiting for you to answer them. So when you are presenting, you need to make sure that you let Mr. Skeptic know why what you're talking about is important and what the benefits are to Mr. Skeptic of hearing your presentation. I start off all of my presentations with a BLUF statement. BLUF is an acronym that means bottom line up front. What that means is that right at the beginning of your presentation, you tell the audience why they are there, and you explain what benefits they're going to derive from being at your presentation. It's so important to let people know at the very beginning of your presentation why they're there. The benefits shouldn't be a punchline at the end. You really need to let them know early and often why they're at your presentation. Remember, at the beginning of the presentation, this slide came up. This was the BLUF statement. This explains why you're here and what you're going to derive. So you're here to learn how to create those kinds of presentations, and you're going to get the results that you want. Now, question for you. Please raise your hand if that is why you're here today, to learn these things. Okay, we're seeing lots and lots of hands shoot up, so that's great. Now, interestingly, when you ask this question, or when you have a slide like this that tells people what they're in for and what the benefits could be, if you do this in a live setting, you might see some people getting up and leaving. Or in a virtual setting, I might notice the attendee level going down, but that's okay. Because when that happens, you are giving people an out. You are allowing them to leave if this isn't the place for them. You don't waste their time. They're not resentful, so win-win. Another thing about the BLUF statement is it's not a laundry list of everything you're going to learn. It's just the overall benefit of what you will derive. And that was on purpose. I'm going to talk a little bit now about features versus benefits. Now, a list of everything that is about something is a feature. So how much it weighs, how big it is, where it is, how many of them there are. This is a description of something. So a characteristic or a description. A benefit, on the other hand, is a great thing that can happen as a result of using the product or service. So using the product might save you time, it might make you happy, it might help solve a problem that you have. And this distinction is very important because when you list features of a product, it's helpful, I suppose, but it doesn't really make people super excited about what you're talking about. Some of that information is important, but it shouldn't be everything that you talk about. On the other hand, a benefit speaks to people's emotions. How does it make you feel when you save money? Why is it important to be unique? Creating an emotional connection with your audience can make your message resonate more deeply. You can get the benefits about what you're talking about when you go through each feature and keep asking, so what? Until you get to the answer, what's in it for me? And I'll show you how that works. We're going to take a step back in time. The year is 2001, and Steve Jobs is introducing the new iPod. This is a slide that shows features. So the features of all of the size, the memory capacity, the storage, and the battery life, right? So those are the features. And then there's Mr. Skeptic. He's not impressed. So what if it's small? So what if it has all this memory and storage, and who cares about battery life? You need to answer those questions for Mr. Skeptic so that he gets excited about buying an iPod. So here are the so whats. It's a compact size, it's tiny, so it's portable. That's pretty good. All of this storage capacity and the big amount of RAM, large amount of RAM, means that it can hold a lot of music. And the fact that it holds 10 hours of battery life on a single charge, that lasts a long time. One charge and you're good for 10 hours. So those are the three benefits that you can derive from those features. But then this guy comes back, so what? Who cares? What's in it for me? Well, if you're my age, then you will understand that back in the day, you had 3 options for carrying music. If you are someone who's not my age, then you might have heard about this in fairy tales. But we used to carry boom boxes around, which were really big. They were like briefcases. We would carry a Discman, and we would carry a Walkman. Boombox could play cassettes. If you had a really fancy one, you could get one that played compact discs. This one plays discs, this one plays cassettes. But now you've got to carry all this stuff around with you, right? That's pretty heavy. That's carrying a lot of media, it's carrying around a heavy object, and you have a battery that might die. So if now we have a product that is small, it has a big memory capacity, and it lasts a long time on a charge, what is a brief, punchy phrase that we can use that summarizes these benefits? 1,000 songs in your pocket. That's a huge benefit, right? So now we can carry around much more music in our pockets. It lasts longer, and it's so much lighter and more portable. So that is the big benefit of an iPod. Now I'll take a break for a sip of water, and I will ask if any questions have come in.
Yes, we have a lot of questions, so this is exciting. So the first one is the BLUF statement essentially the incorporation of motivational interviewing in your presentation focus and style?
Please repeat that. I've never heard it quite phrased like that before.
Yeah, sure. Is the BLUF statement essentially the incorporation of motivational interviewing in your presentation focus and style?
Well, I must admit, I have never heard the phrase motivational interviewing, but I can imagine it is an aspect of understanding who the audience is that you're trying to influence. And definitely the BLUF statement would change depending on who you're talking to and what you want them to do. I hope I answered that question. If not, please ask it again and I'll take another stab at it.
Okay, and then a couple of questions around how about if you have too many stakeholders or audiences, or how do you tailor the presentations to a mixed group where there might be different types of folks in the audience?
Well, it would depend on the setting. So let's say you have a conference and there are people from all different parts of a company. There are people from HR, there are people in IT, there are engineers, there are people from the warehouse, and everyone's all in there. Then you're probably not going to give a high-level presentation on how cloud storage works, because the people in the warehouse wouldn't care. And on the other hand, you might not want to talk about how sturdy the packaging is and how it can put up with a rough shipment, because maybe the people in IT wouldn't care and the warehouse guys would. So if you are presenting to a blended audience with all kinds of different backgrounds and experiences, you need to make sure that your message is something that is important for all of them to hear at the same time. So it might be a motivational message about how great the company's doing, or about how a change that's being made is going to mean, I don't know, higher pay, fewer hours, more flexible scheduling. You need to find the thing that is going to unite this whole audience behind an idea. There is no single presentation that's going to be good for every different kind of audience. So if you were hoping that the answer to that was just go with one single presentation, then I'm afraid it doesn't work that way. That's an excellent question.
All right, could you just remind folks of what BLUF stands for again?
Yes, BLUF means bottom line up front. The bottom line is the ultimate benefit or thing that you want people to do in order to achieve the benefit. And upfront means say it at the beginning of your presentation so that people don't have to wait through the entire presentation before they realize what you're offering and what they stand to gain.
And kind of a follow-on to that, should then folks communicate the call to action at the beginning of the presentation or wait till the end?
It can help to mention what the call to action is going to be, but usually the call to action is the end. It's the culmination of all of the things that you have told them why they should do it, and then you tell them to do it. So if I sat down right now and said, everybody, the goal of this presentation is to teach you that you have to make a different presentation for every audience, and it's going to take a long time, that's not much of a benefit. But at the end, people are going to understand why that's necessary and why it's important and helpful to do that. So you need to work up to that sell. And I hope I didn't scare you by telling you that at the beginning, but by the end, you'll realize why I said that.
Okay, we do have a lot more questions, Laura, but if you want to continue, we could do that.
Yes, let's keep going. And
okay,
maybe if some of the questions are answered, they'll fall off the board. And I'll say this now, that if everyone in the audience has a question that wasn't answered by me during the presentation because we ran out of time, I'm going to put my contact information in the window so that you can contact me. I'll do that right now, and I'll do it again toward the end so that if you do have questions that weren't addressed, that will I'll be able to answer them for you.
Fantastic, thank you.
There you go. Okay, let's continue. Now I want to talk about rule number 2 for great presentation, is to focus on the audience and not on yourself. We talked about that a little bit before, about who you're what kind of people are in your audience, what's their experience level. It's not always this obvious. When we're presenting for a purpose of selling or teaching, we don't usually go on and on and on about ourselves and how great we are and how talented we are and how our experience is, blah, 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 blah. But I've seen presenter-focused presentations from tech companies that they seem like they're helpful, but they're really very presenter-focused. And let me show you what that means and what it looks like. You might recognize some of these slides, not the actual slides, but the idea of them. And we start off with a title slide, client presentation. Pretty compelling, right? Not the name of the company for this case is Tech Consultants, because I anonymized it. So Tech Consultants, Consulting and Contracting Services, and then some more titles. So a whole half of this is taken up by a title that doesn't address the name of the client. Down here, we've got Tech Consultants with their little motto, and then their 3 words that they live by. And in case you were wondering, there's their logo again. So a lot about themselves in the title slide. Moving on, slide number 2, introductions. Here's your team, talking about who the people on the team are and how to get in touch with them. That's okay information, but it's right in the front, taking up a lot of real estate on the slide. Ooh, and here's a favorite of mine, Tech Consultants Headquarters. How many presentations have you seen that have a picture of some company that's in an office park? Something like that. And this goes on, actually. These are the first, the next 12 slides in the presentation. And we don't get to the client until we get to slide 15. And even then, that client identification of needs, client requirements, that was pulled out of the evergreen deck, which means that they didn't customize it for that particular client. All of these parts in here, I'll zoom in on some of these things. So we've got the capabilities, who we are, corporate profile, what we do, our approach, blah, 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 blah. So all this stuff is all about the company and not about the client. See, slide 15 is when we finally get around to talking to the client. And that takes a long time. Remember, Mr. Skeptic wants to know right away, so what and what's in it for me? What do I stand to gain? And we tell him that with our BLUF statement up front, highlighting the benefits to the audience. So we need to let the audience know that we're considering their needs. We are answering their questions and we're solving their problems. So instead of the real star of the presentation being yourself, it's your audience. Any questions so far on that little segment or something that I might have missed earlier?
Yeah, sure. So what if people do need to learn the features and benefits are kind of a nice to have? Any recommendations on that? Would you still share the benefits?
I'm sorry. So the question is whether you should share benefits and features or not?
Yeah, well, if people do need to learn what the features are and the benefits would be kind of a nice to have type of thing, would you still, any recommendations on that? Would you still share the benefits?
It depends on your audience. And let's go back to a technical example. If there's a new, I don't know, PC board and you are presenting to your business unit about incorporating this new board design into your latest tech, then you would focus very heavily on features because maybe it's faster, more efficient, uses less resources in its manufacture, maybe it's lighter, maybe it's heat resistant. So all of those features would be very important if you're talking to the people who are going to use it. On the other hand, if you are talking to the people who are going to be procuring it or buying it for the supply chain, then other things might be more important. So some of the features of it being lighter might be that it's less expensive to ship. And that's a benefit that is derived because this thing is lighter. Even if you are presenting to an audience of your peers, it's good to put in the benefits of what you're talking about. You don't have to try to be as persuasive as if you're trying to get someone to change their mind or buying something, because if you're presenting to your peers, let's assume that they're pretty much on your team, they're on your side, so that some of the benefits to them might be things like it will take you less time to do something, you'll have more time to focus on interesting things and less time on boring administrative things. So I think no matter what the audience is, you need to throw in a couple of benefits, but depending on your audience, it's a features heavy presentation could work if it's to your peers and that you don't think they're going to be bored by all of those things.
Okay, and one other one then around, there's a lot of amount of ridiculous text and complex diagrams on slides. So how do you help folks, or how can people help folks influence a shift to best practices when they have no formal power over most of the worst offenders?
What a splendid question. And it's one that I run into often because when I'm teaching people about presentation design, often it's the support staff that I'm teaching or people who really can't change the way things are because things are always done this way. What I usually recommend in that case is that you show a presentation that's been redesigned in this way and let the results speak for themselves. Are people coming up to you more often asking pertinent questions? Are people buying the product? Are people changing their habits? Have they demonstrated knowledge that they didn't have before? Often what happens is that once people start to practice this different way of presentation design, they see much better results from what the audience is doing than if they just do that whole laundry list bullet point kind of design.
Okay. We do have some more questions in, but you want to continue with the presentation?
Yes, let's go on.
Okay.
So the next part of the presentation is about telling stories and demonstrating with actual props or products rather than just talking about them. For this demonstration, I'm going to show this picture here, the three little pigs. And I would like to ask our moderator, Margaret, if she could very briefly tell me, do you remember the story? And if so, could you tell us the story of the three little pigs?
Ooh, okay. Well, I do have 4 children. My youngest now is 16, so we did read a lot of the Three Little Pigs growing up, but it's been quite a while. So let me see. 3 pigs go off into the woods to venture out. There's the youngest one builds a house of straw. The second one builds a house of sticks. And the third one builds a house out of bricks. And they're trying to protect themselves from the wolf who wants to come eat them. So the wolf comes to the first house of straw and says, let me in, little piggy, let me in. And he goes, not by the hair of my chinny chin chin. And the wolf says, I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down. So he does that to the straw one. Then they go to the house of sticks. He does the same thing, repeats the same thing. Then he goes to the house of bricks. And of course he can't huff and puff and blow that house down because it's too strong. So he tries to shimmy down the chimney, and when he gets to the bottom, you see that pot of boiling water there. He falls into that pot of boiling water and jumps out and runs away, and they never see him again.
That is right. Thank you very much. Now, you mentioned that your youngest son is 16, so I imagine you didn't read that story to him last night before bed, right?
No. That was a daughter, but yeah.
Oh, sorry about that.
Didn't read it to her either.
So the last time you read this to your daughter might have been 10 years ago? 9 years ago?
Or more, yeah.
Or more.
Yeah.
Now, that's a long time to remember a story from start to finish, right? And I'm sure that many of you in the audience, if you read this when you were a little kid or had it read to you, that you remembered this story. Margaret flawlessly told us this story based on her memory of it. Stories like this stick with us. Let me ask you, Margaret, if you were one of the three little pigs, which one are you? Quick.
The one that built the house of bricks.
That's right, because he's the smartest one. Everyone identifies with the house, the pig who was smart enough to build the brick house. And that's an important message too, is that you learn that by planning ahead, by using the correct building materials, you can have a safe place to live, you can help your family, you can repel enemies. All of these messages in this one little story that we remember throughout the years. That's a pretty powerful thing. Stories that you can relate in your own work can help people to remember what you're talking about and to relate it to their own experience. I'm going to take a moment to have a sip of water while you absorb the majesty of this slide. This is a slide that was adapted from an actual client's presentation. The client had come up with some really cool adaptive technology to help people with low vision to navigate the world. But a version of this slide was what she had in her presentation. We start off with a title, Improving Interactions for Low Vision, bullet point, what challenges do they face, bullet point. And then we've got Mr. Blobby here, who's just some random clip art guy who has low vision. Probably not inciting an emotional response in you. But if we change it to this, we have the crux of the problem is that people with low vision have difficulty navigating space and finding things. We have a picture of someone who is squinting and things in the background that are blurry. And what we might do if we were presenting this is to develop a story about this person. So rather than being just a piece of stock photography, we'll give him a name. This is Alan. And Alan used to be very, very active in his community. He used to volunteer a lot. And he noticed that things were getting a little hard to see. Things were getting blurry. But Alan is a very proud person. He doesn't like looking for help. He doesn't like asking for help. So when his vision started getting blurry, he just denied it. And he kept going out and trying to do things until he got to the point where he couldn't see enough to see the packages on the shelves. And eventually he stopped driving and he became very introverted. And it was all because of his low vision with a problem that could be corrected. Now, as I was telling you this story and as you're looking at the photograph, maybe you know Alan. Maybe your dad is Alan, maybe your brother, your uncle, your friend, your son, maybe someone you know is Alan. Whatever it is, now it's not just a Mr. Blobby character of clip art. Now it's a person. And we can feel emotion for this person and connect with him. Interestingly, we in business world, we do have stories, and they're called case studies. Case studies are the story of how our product or service was used to help a customer to overcome this big bad problem that they had, and they turned to us and we gave them this solution, and now they've got this wild success and everything's great, right? That's a story. And you can incorporate those into your presentations. That's why case studies and stories are so helpful. because they help the audience to consider what they would do in that situation or how you have helped people in a similar situation. Now let's talk a little bit about presentations. Let me see, Margaret, could you please lower everyone's electronically raised hand so I can ask a new question?
I'm trying to do that. I'm not sure if I have that power, but if you, if folks can please lower their hand.
I think maybe Walter, do you do that? Can you lower everybody's hand for me? No, they're going down, so people are turning them off. I'll see if they go up again. The question is from me to you, please raise your hand if you do live demonstrations during your presentations. That would be either a virtual presentation or a in-person presentation. Okay, I'm seeing now, I'm gonna cut the questions off now. I see 37 people. Oh, it's going up to 38, 37, hovering around there. So about 37 people do live presentations. That's great. I want more of you to do live presentations because they're very helpful. They give the audience something to look at. And if you call an audience member up, it gives that audience member a chance to experience what you're talking about. And it gives the whole other audience, maybe they are either enjoying the other person's experience or enjoying the fact that it's not them who's being called up. But the demonstrations are memorable. You remember what happened during a demonstration. This photograph is of a woman with some gauze in front of her face to indicate that you can simulate low vision to show people what it's like. And somebody in the chat said that it's important to acknowledge that correcting blurry vision with glasses is different from people with low vision, rather correcting low vision conditions, which might require surgery. But for the purpose of a quick demonstration, simulating these low vision situations can help people to empathize with people who are experiencing low vision. Now, I'm not sure if you are doing a side-by-side viewing where you can see my slides and me, but if you can see me, take a look at me now. I'm going to block the vision using a cataract tool that I developed. This is a pair of shop glasses that I made into a cataract simulation tool by covering little surface area with clear nail polish and getting a little piece of toilet paper before it was as valuable as gold, but little piece of toilet paper and dabbing it on the glasses so that little bits of it stuck to the glasses. The result is that you can see through them a bit, but it's very hard to make out details. You can see that I'm waving, but you can't see distinct details. And that's another way to get people to empathize with what you're talking about. Moving on to the next rule for great presentations. Rule number 4 is to plan well. My kids hate this meme because they think it's old and I'm old, but I don't care. I love this meme. And I will say that one does not simply do a PowerPoint. You don't just sit down there and a PowerPoint or a presentation develops. You need to plan a presentation and to put in some effort. When you're starting a presentation, ideally you'd like to start with an outline, because when you do an outline, you can list all of the ideas that you have and you can rearrange them so that they make sense as a story or as a narrative that goes from start to finish. You might already have experiences with outlines if you've ever written a paper, or an outline might be a table of contents as well, or even the main headings of a document. You start with that. But what you don't start with is working on an outline in PowerPoint. And because at this point, you should only be thinking about the ideas and not the slide design. The slide design comes out at the very end of the process. The problem with creating your outline in PowerPoint is that if you do that, you might be tempted to start working on the slides themselves. And then you get slides that look like this, where you've got bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, and then a little picture shoehorned in there so that you've got this slide that looks like something that you would read. It's really easy to fall into this pattern when you're working in PowerPoint. So when you're working on your slide outline, use anything but PowerPoint. Use Word, Google Docs. You could write it in a text, like a notes or text. You could do it on Post-it notes, anything but PowerPoint, because right now you're working on just the ideas for your presentation. Your outline looks something like this. So now you've got your title, sandwiches are awesome. And I see someone is hungry in the chat, sorry. For some reason, I usually get put on right before lunch. I don't know if that's just my bad luck or what. Maybe I should swap out the sandwich slide. But you've got your main title, you've got headings, and you've got subheadings. And then way down here, you've got subheadings. You can do as much bullet point stuff as you like in the outline, because this is a tool for you to develop your presentation and your audience is never going to see it. When you do translate your outline into your slides, you want to try to just have one idea per slide. And the reason is because you want your audience to glance at the slide and then pay more attention to you. When you are in front of the room, in a real life presenting situation, you can be the person who's moving and talking, and everyone focuses on their attention on you. When you are remote presenting, I don't know if you can see me, but I am still moving around and trying to be more gestural to attract more attention away from this slide, which has one idea on it, back to me. But where do you put all of that information? Well, down here, this is a normal view in PowerPoint, and I know that Google Slides and Keynote has a version of this, but down here is where your speaker notes go. Having a robust speaker notes section is really helpful, especially if you are not the only person who gives this presentation. Because, well, let me back up a little bit. Having good speaker notes helps you to practice so that when you're in the presenter view, you can read your speaker notes and make sure that you hit on all the things that you wanted to. If you are developing a presentation for other people to use, having good speaker notes ensures that people are all going to talk about the same thing. It lessens the opportunity for people to go off on tangents because they know what they have to talk about, because all of that information is in here in the speaker notes section. In the speaker notes section, you can also add cues or prompts. In my speaker notes section, I have click prompts, so it will actually be bracket, click, bracket, so that I know when I'm supposed to activate an animation. Okay, we've arrived at another question area. Do we have any questions on stories or live demos or planning your presentations?
We do. So there is a question around, what if it's a technical talk and you can't do a demonstration? Is a simulation video satisfactory when you can't do a demonstration?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, a simulation video is preferable because I don't know about you, but whenever I do a live demo of something, that's the time it takes to die. It will fail and the live demo won't work. So having a Camtasia or a screen capture of a live demonstration can really help, especially if a product isn't entirely done. You can show how it's supposed to work or how it might work when it is done. But having that kind of a visual helps people to understand how they might interact with a product or how the product might act when things happen to it, so that it makes it easier for people to see what's going on than it is for you to explain what's going on. Does that make sense? Hope I answered your question.
All right, another one is, what tips do you have for presenting to a hostile or unreceptive audience?
Ooh, hostile or unreceptive? Well, it would depend. There are a couple of scenarios I can see for that. If you were trying to do some positive spin on something bad that happened and you've got a lot of skeptics in the crowd, that's one scenario. If an angry person interrupts you or if the crowd turns hostile, that's a different question. Honestly, that has never happened to me, thank goodness. So I've never had to deliver terrible news to someone, and I've never had to deal with a heckler. But I do know that from people I know who have dealt with them, is that you should be presenting from a feeling of empathy, especially if you are delivering bad news or convening a group to react to bad news. By acknowledging that it is bad news and that you're not trying to sugarcoat it, but you're trying to work through it, that can put you on their side so that you're not seen so much as adversarial, but more of a helper and someone who, like them, wants all this problem to be gone.
Great, and there's another one kind of around the timing of the demo. Say you only have 30 minutes for a presentation, you have another speaker speaking with you. Where would you place kind of the importance of having a demo in that period of time versus not? What are the things you could, kind of keep in mind as to decide whether or not you should do a demo, given the time that you have to speak?
It depends on your goal. If it's a 30-minute meeting and it is, say, a pitch meeting, you're trying to get funding or you're trying to convince someone to support you, give you resources, then absolutely a demo would be very important. If you have 30 minutes and it's a shop talk with your peers, then maybe they already know how it works or how it's supposed to work, and a demo wouldn't be as important. Demonstrations are very helpful when you are trying to get interest in something that people don't already know about, or that they have some perception of something that you want to change. So I would say something that is a peer meeting that you're just doing, say, a status report kind of thing, not as important. If you're trying to teach someone, convince someone, or give them some lesson that they can keep with them, then having a demonstration can really make that happen.
Okay. And one more around, can you speak to how to make a training presentation more interesting?
I hope that what I'm doing now is making it more interesting for you. I'm leading by example. At the end of this presentation, I'm going to let you have a peek behind the curtain and show you what I'm doing to make the training presentation more interesting. What I do in real life is I incorporate a lot of exercises and question and answer so that people aren't just sitting there listening. They're doing and they're working on the concepts that I'm teaching, and they're learning how the process works. It's a little harder to do that in an online setting, because if you say to someone, okay, everyone, for the next 10 minutes, I would like you to work on questions A, B, and C on your worksheet. For all you know, they're spending the next 10 minutes going and making a sandwich or shopping online. You really don't have control over that. So trying to keep people presently engaged, what I'm doing is I'm breaking for questions. I'm allowing you to answer questions and ask questions. And with Margaret's help, I'm fielding these questions so that you're getting these responses in real time. And I think
so one more, Laura, kind of around this story topic, if that's okay before we move on, is how do you have a story for a topic that's very technical? It can sometimes be difficult to have a story for heavily technical topics. Any suggestions?
That's an excellent question. I'm not saying that to stall for time. I'm saying it because it is an excellent question. And I would counter that there's a story every place. Even if you're let me give you an example. I've worked with people at an engineering company, and they would have an annual meeting and they would give these 20-minute tech talks. And some of the topics were things like, I've redesigned the tip of this wire to use X amount of material less, and therefore it will save the company money. So actually the save the company money was something that maybe they'd add in later, but a lot of times they would focus on the fact that it's using this design, it's using this much less materials, and it is 20% more efficient than the other one. But the story might be that because this part is 20% more efficient, the medical device it goes into is able to come up with readings that much more quickly and save more lives. So when you're coming up with stories for a technical product, you might want to consider what the product is used for, who uses it, and why. And by changing something of its construction or something in the way behind the scenes part, it might have an effect way down the road for someone that you don't even know, but that could potentially realize this benefit from the efficiencies that you have brought to this one part. Does that make sense? Okay,
thank you so much.
We should move on, and then we'll
Okay.
have another break. And I will remind everyone that if you scroll up in the chat, you can see my contact information. If I don't get to your question, please do continue the conversation. I want to answer everyone's questions, either by email or LinkedIn, if we don't get them, don't address them all here today. All right, rule number 5 for great presentations: edit, edit, edit. You know how location, location, location is the key to selling a good property or getting good money for a house? Edit, edit, edit is the key to getting a good presentation. The way that I like to tell people to edit their presentations is to use the analyze and synthesize method. When we analyze a slide, we're looking at it, we're reading it, and we're trying to figure out what the main message of that slide is. And when we synthesize it, we take bits of the main message, we add maybe video, audio, movement, animation to come up with a combination of content and visuals that's more interesting to look at. If you compare the slide on the left to the one on the right, you see that the one on the right has 3 words in it, right? The one on the left is all about Arches National Park. But we don't want people to read all of that while we're talking. We want people to look at the image of the park and go, wow, I really want to go there. That seems like a great place. And while people are looking at that picture, you can be telling them about all the interesting stuff. Marie Kondo has made a living of telling people how to tidy up, how to clean up, and how to get rid of that which does not spark joy. This slide came from an actual presentation, and it is essentially his resume. Little headshot, his resume, all that information. And when I analyzed this slide, I read about all of the things that he used to do and that he does now, and I realized that people in the audience probably wouldn't take the time to read all this, but they could take the time to read this. This is a very brief description of who he is. Used to be a hacker, now he's a good guy, and that's how he can speak with authority on the subject that he's about to talk about, which is cybersecurity. If you don't analyze and synthesize your slides, if you just toss everything you know up there on the slide, then you can end up like this guy here. This is a photograph from an actual presentation that someone snapped from the audience. Reading or having this kind of a slide is so painful for the audience to watch, because the audience can usually read, and if you're reading the presentation to them, it can be quite insulting, and it can be a waste of time, because you don't go to a presentation to be read to. If the intent is to if the intent is to deliver information with words and by reading, then you can send the presentation and let the person read it. Don't waste their time by having them sit in a webinar or in an auditorium listening to it. One of the benefits of doing a live presentation and doing a webinar like this is that we can make connections with the audience. And if we're just reading from slides, then we miss so many opportunities to interact with our audiences. Another way that we can analyze and synthesize is to make our ideas more easy to understand, make them more simple. This is not always easy, I'll admit this, and it's not easy to simplify something without sounding like you're talking to a little kid or make it sound like you're talking down to them. That's not what I mean at all. What I mean is that you should be able to explain difficult concepts in language that most people can understand so that they can realize what you're talking about. And this is how I explain the difference between simplistic and simple. Simplistic is you're talking to a little kid. Simple is, imagine that you can explain a concept to your grandmother or to your mother in such a way that not only can she understand what you're talking about, but she can accurately explain it to someone else. That is a very simple message. I often get pushback on this. People, engineers, technical people, scientists, they often tell me that their information is very complicated and that if they don't want to sound stupid by being simple. I was working with a lady, a female engineer a couple of years ago, and I was giving her this advice of how to simplify her presentation, concentrate on just a couple of key elements. And she interrupted me. She said, look, I am going to be one of the only women at this conference. And if I talk the way you're telling me to, they're going to think I'm an idiot. They're going to think I'm just a girl and that I don't know what I'm talking about. And I tried to convince her that wasn't true, that by being simple and focusing on a couple of key messages, she would sound even more in control of her information. But I could tell on the call that she wasn't really following along, and it sounded like she wasn't going to take my advice. So a couple weeks later, she called back and she said, you were right. And not only did she have a better time presenting, but people came up to her afterwards and were interacting with her in a way they hadn't before. And nobody thought that she was stupid, and nobody thought that she didn't know what she was talking about. On the contrary, she made her stuff seem so interesting that people wanted to continue that conversation with her. Now let's get to the synthesized part about getting pictures into your presentations. Now this is something you probably heard a million billion times, that a picture is worth 1,000 words. But they say it so often because it is true. And scientifically, it's called the picture superiority effect. The way that works is that if you only have text on a slide and you show it to an audience, 3 days later, they're likely to only remember 10% of what they read. But if that information is accompanied by an image, 3 days later, they will remember 65% of what they read. This is, source is John Medina from a 2008 book called Brain Rules. I highly recommend it. Now let's see this in action. I'm going to pause for a sip of water while I let you read this. And apologies again, this is another food slide. I guess I like food. All right. If I were giving this to a live audience, I would ask them to raise their hands when they're done. And what generally happens is that some people finish very quickly, others finish very slowly, so that you get this rolling amount of people holding up their hands. But what if I showed you this? Boom, nori rolls, right? That's all you need. If you can find a picture that illustrates what you're talking about, you can get people to understand what you're talking about much more quickly. Now, some of you might be saying, that's all well and good, but where do I find all these super cool free photos? Well, here you go. In the chat window, I have just pasted a lot of different resources that you can visit to find free photographs. And when I say free, I mean free. That means cost-free. You don't pay money for them. And copyright free. You don't have to acknowledge where they came from. So that can save you and your company and your organization money. Plus, you get thousands and thousands of pictures that you can choose from. So please do use those resources. All right, next up, the last rule, maybe the most important one, is you need to show some energy, show some enthusiasm and some excitement for what you're talking about. You want to show that you want good things for your audience. You're giving the audience a gift and you're hoping that they like it and do the things that you're asking them to do. On the other hand, take a look at this. Does this look familiar? This poor lady is trying to present something that is interesting and it's useful. It's actually pretty good information that could make or break a company, but her audience doesn't care, because her presentation style is boring and her slides are boring. But just because you're presenting something technical does not mean you have to be boring. Case in point, Mythbusters. They made science cool by blowing stuff up on camera, on TV. But not only blowing stuff up, they told us all about the science of it. They would start with a hypothesis and then work through the scientific method to either prove or disprove their hypothesis. They showed us trigonometry and calculus to figure out where things were going to end up after they blew up. They touched on material science, on physics, and all kinds of things to make a very entertaining and funny program. The lady in the middle is Jane Goodall, and she often does imitations of the chimps that she studied. Something that she was really good at was making us care about primatology by not giving her primate subjects numbers, but giving them names, talking about their families to help us understand that in a lot of ways, chimpanzees are like people. The guy on the right you probably don't know about. His name is Tom Fisher, and he was my entomology teacher at University of New Hampshire. What's a graphic designer doing studying entomology? I saw him on day one of student orientation, and I said to my mom, I don't care what he teaches, I'm taking that class. Because he was so funny and so engaging. And he would do insect impersonations, and he would make us all learn the alma mater for homecoming. And it was just a joy to go to his class because he was excited about entomology, and that made me excited about it too. Sometimes you might have trouble acting enthusiastic if you're not generally an outgoing or enthusiastic person. Dale Carnegie phrased it, act enthusiastic and you'll be enthusiastic. Another way that it's called is fake it till you make it. But when you're presenting, you're really on stage. And by being on stage, you are the focus of the audience. And when the audience is focused on you, you can show that you are focused on their enjoyment of this information by presenting it in such a way that it's just fun. It's a joy to be there. It's great that you have this opportunity to present to them, to teach them, to possibly solve their problems. Now, going back to the hostile audience question, you would definitely not want to act super psyched about something that is causing a giant problem. But you can also be enthusiastic by being earnestly invested in what you're talking about, by showing empathy, by being kind. So all of those nice leadership emotions that hopefully that you would be employing as a leader trying to motivate people, that you would be bringing these same kinds of activities to your presentations so that people are interested in hearing what you have to say. And you remember this guy, right? Well, what if he was more like this? And you forget the fact that it's another guy entirely, but he's got a better slide talking about, it's a summary of what that slide used to be like. He's out from behind the counter, he's standing up, he's gesturing, and he's being a lot more invested in being a good presenter and in giving the audience a good experience. Now, we've done a lot of work so far to get to this point. Does anybody have any questions so far? I would like to say that I'd like to limit it to about 2 questions so that we can move on to the rest of the presentation before we run short on time.
Okay, a couple questions, Laura, is around when you are trying to have that interaction and dialogue with your audience to get an understanding of, are they grasping the concepts that I'm communicating to them, and you don't hear anything back from them? How do you handle situations like that where you're trying to get the feedback, but you're not?
Well, this is an excellent opportunity to reveal a truth about presenting, is that sometimes you won't get questions. And in fact, audience, Margaret and I had some communication before today where I gave her some questions that she could ask on your behalf. And that was just in case people didn't have questions, which can happen, but it's also to get conversation going at times when that needs to happen, such as when my link cut out that she needed to have something to talk about. Setting that up ahead of time can help you to get those conversations or keep those conversations from lagging. It really helps if you have a moderator when you're online, as you certainly experienced at the beginning of this presentation. If you're by yourself and you're asking questions and all you get are crickets, you can bring up a point in the case of a story like, well, one time I was helping a client and blah, 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 or one time my team and I were trying to solve this problem and then that happened. So you should always have some kind of conversation starter in your pocket for those times when people aren't asking questions. And Heather remarks in the chat that asking open-ended questions are a good idea, good way to get conversations to continue. So an open-ended question would not be a yes or no question. It would be maybe, what would you think of this if this happened? Or how would you react if that happened? Or if we change this one aspect of this, what do you think the effects might be? So questions that don't have a set answer can really keep the conversation going.
Okay, and one more before you continue is we're doing a lot of online meetings, through Zoom and other, video conferencing. How can you show enthusiasm when you're doing the online presenting?
Well, I hope that I have been demonstrating my enthusiasm for this subject all along. Some things that we can do vocally do help our enthusiasm to come across. Let me give you an example of what it sounds like when I'm not enthusiastic. Now I'd like to take a moment to ask our moderator if there are any questions. I don't know, did you guys ask, do you want any questions answered? I don't know. So showing enthusiasm, part of it is being confident. Part of it is speaking in a louder voice. Right now I'm presenting in a louder voice than I would ordinarily use to speak to someone who's standing next to me. I am smiling while I talk, and I can see myself in the teeny little window on the side to make sure that I'm still doing that. I'm gesturing. I'm leaning in when I'm saying something that I want you to understand. I'm looking at the camera rather than looking at my notes so that it looks as though we are making eye contact. And this is hard for me. I'm trying to pause a little bit more, trying to slow down a little bit more. So those kinds of vocal tricks can help project that enthusiasm that you have for a subject to your audience. All right. Earlier on, I promised that you would get to see some of the ways that I have made this specifically a remote presentation and show you some of the things that you can do to help be a more, I wouldn't say unusual presenter, but one that stands out from a crowd in a good way. I can't think of the word, what that means, a good unique presenter. Involving the audience. That is a really important part of engaging people when you can't see them. Because as I mentioned earlier, they could be doing anything really. They could be getting up and going to get that sandwich, or they could be patting their dog or talking to someone else while muted. You try to offer as many chances to interact with you as you can. And you can do some of this pretty well remotely, as it turns out. These are the things that I showed you at the beginning of involving the audience. So we had this is how you'll interact. This is the big picture of what you click to raise your hand, ask questions on Q&A, chat among yourselves. And I got the screenshots from taking the screenshots off of my computer and then putting them onto the screen like that. And then I've got this laser pointer here to draw attention to what I'm doing. Now, if we have a little time towards the end, I will show you how that works. But in PowerPoint, you can, let me do it right now, whatever. I'll share that with you. Okay, so now you will see that I've got PowerPoint on. And here we've got a little laser pointer, which I can select. Oops, I just deselect it. So when I select it and I see the little dot right here on the big presentation, you can see that it's going. You can also draw on your screen. I've got a pen tool. I can draw a little picture on that. And you wouldn't necessarily just draw these just doodles. You would draw things that maybe you're drawing an arrow to point out something, or maybe you're circling something that you're talking about to get people to look at it. And then when you're done with those things, you can erase the ink on the slide, or you can keep it. You can also zoom in on things on the slide, as I did earlier, to show you that big group of 15 slides, and move it around to get people to pay attention to different things. So there are some cool things you can do online that you can't do when you're talking to a real group. Now, for some reason, these little things are staying, and they're supposed to be going. So isn't that just the thing? Good thing I held off to the end for this. So one of the things that you really need to pay attention to is the different platforms that you have to present remotely require different setups. Zoom, for example, there are Zoom meetings and there are Zoom webinars. When I set up these slides initially, it was for Zoom meeting because that's what I'm familiar with. Zoom webinar, it turns out, has different controls, as do Teams, Join Me, Skype, GoToMeeting, Hangouts. They're all different. You need to practice with that platform so that you can both tell people how to use it and that you're comfortable using it. Now let me go back to the slides so you can see what I'm talking about. There we go. So all of these different platforms require you to interact differently, and you should figure out how that works before you start. Luckily, since we're all new at this, it's not going to be the end of the world if something gets messed up, but you should try to demonstrate at least a little bit of mastery over the process. Now here are those tools. That appears in PowerPoint, that appears in the view that the audience sees. But I showed you when I cut away that those are also available in the presenter view. So those are tricks, or those are things that you can play around with before your presentations to find out how they work, to see how you can make your presentations a little bit more full of movement or animation or live pointing out things. So we'll show that, the laser pointer, things like that. So you can draw people's attention to things. There are some things that remote presentations aren't really good at, and some things you should just not use at all. Video and audio. I have been at informal presentations that used video and audio pretty well, but it's not something that I would depend on for, say, a business presentation or this webinar, because you've got so many people dialing in, calling in from all over the place, all over the world, that some people might have bandwidth issues and not be able to hear clearly or see a video clearly. In fact, the video that I was watching the other night was going like jump cut, jump cut, jump cut to different scenes because it couldn't keep up with the actual movement. So that it would be like a whole bunch of different photographs stuck together while the audio kept up. So be very careful about including those in your presentations. Complex animation and slide transitions, you should not use those. Every animation should be a peer so that you're not waiting for things to slowly dissolve into place. And slide transitions should be none, again, so you don't have those little dissolved slides not quite going as fast as they should. Now I wanted to show you a little bit about the slide makeovers that transform those slides you saw in the beginning to something that works a lot better using the principles that we talked about. This was the slide that I showed at the beginning where it's part of a sales presentation where they're trying to convince somebody that they should buy their software because it's not going to mess up their entire system. This slide requires a lot of reading. It requires a lot of interpretation. And we also have these kind of strange clip arts or security, I guess, certified and A-OK checklist, whatever that might be. These throwaway icons don't really help to drive the message that this is a trusted software that's not going to mess everything up on the client side. So to do that, we just show people, here's where this software is going to live in your server racks. And we understand that you need trusted and certified integrations between our EIM, CompuConstruct being the name of the company, and mission critical enterprise applications. In other words, our software isn't going to mess you up. If you wanted to talk about all the different types of CC Vision and other applications and the types of mission critical enterprise applications, you can, but you don't have to show that on the slide. The next one I redesigned was this NASA slide. There's a lot of information on here, but there's too much of it. And this would be a slide that would possibly be given to peers. The question was earlier, do you want benefits to show to your peers? Yes, you do. We bring in a picture. This is a picture from NASA, and I got it off of the NASA website. So it's copyright free because it belongs to everybody. So my big question is, what's the big deal about M&S, modeling and simulation? First big deal is there, comes in on a click. Second big deal, essentially these are the bullet points, but done a lot smaller, a lot more edited. And then the punchline, this is the big deal. It's cheaper, it's faster, it's less risky than blowing up actual billion-dollar rocket ships to prove that something doesn't work. That's the big benefit. And that is what you would want to emphasize when you're giving this presentation. I talked earlier about how this slide, even though it's a hot mess right now, it's actually demonstrating or trying to communicate some very big numbers and some great changes or great ways that change could help bring those big numbers down. So we start off with problem statement. Engineers are spending too much time looking for information. If we multiply that time that they are looking by the number of engineers we have, they're wasting 14,000 hours a year. We're flushing almost $118 million a year down the toilet. So that's the way things are now. But we can reduce this. There is hope. Then we talk about how we could reduce it and how much money that will save, and how another benefit is that the engineers can now use this time that they used to be wasting to create new parts, to do good work, and to not just be looking stuff up. Now, we covered a lot today. We talked about the 6 rules for great presentations. I showed you some slide makeovers, and then I showed you a little bit of the sausage factory of teaching people how to interact with me, giving me a way to interact with you by answering your questions, and giving you a little taste of how that's done behind the scene. By now, I'm hoping that you have gotten some ideas that you can bring back to your own work to create clear and informative and entertaining presentations, and that you're able to get those results that you want because your presentations are clear and informative and entertaining. And with that, we do have some time for some more questions and answers. I put all this information up here. If you like typing by looking at things, and then, I mean, if you want to just look at that and copy some of those words down, or I can put that information back in to the chat window so that you can get in touch with me. And also, there is a cheat sheet that I have made that has all of a lot of the highlight information that I gave to you, the things about the BLUF statement and the 6 rules and the difference between features and benefits that you can refer to. So if you want that, you can get on that link there, and you also can sign up for a 30-minute consultation to talk about these kinds of things if you like, and that would be at no cost to you. So, Margaret, are there any questions that I didn't get to?
Yeah, sure there are. And so thank you so much, Laura. This has been fantastic. So you've talked a lot about what we can do from a presentation side. What about, I'm not the best public speaker. Do you have any advice for me?
I would say that when I talked about the enthusiasm and being energized about your subject, If you are shy to talk about other subjects, you're probably pretty excited about your own subject. So you can draw on your own excitement for that to communicate it to other people. But for practical purposes, I always recommend a group called Toastmasters. And they are an international organization with chapters all over the world. Now you can join online, and that's really fun because you get to travel all over the world and talk with different people. Toastmasters, through a series of exercises, teaches you how to develop a speech, how to deliver a speech, teaches you things like the vocal variety and inflections that I've been talking about, talks about body language and gestures. And being in Toastmasters gives you a lot of practical experience. If you don't want to join a group, or you, for some reason, aren't able to, then practice speaking in front of an audience, practice striking up conversations. I really had to fake it till I make it. I was never an extrovert when I was a kid. And it was only by forcing myself to talk to people that I was able to develop the skills of starting conversations from nothing, really, and talking to people.
Awesome. Okay, a couple more questions here. So can you go into some suggestions around presenting enough content when you can't be there to explain the slide? So sometimes you create slides and you keep it nice and concise and visually appealing for the folks that are in the room. And then sometimes you may have to pass that content along to others to consume as well without getting the full context. So any thoughts around kind of the balance there?
Absolutely. And if we had a little more time, I would show you, but right now I'm going to tell you that you can create handouts from your presentations. And if you have speaker notes on your slides, then actually, I think I can stop sharing now so everyone can see me. There we go. So when you create handouts and have speaker notes in your slides, what that does is you can create a handout that has all of the text that you talk about, which is why I always emphasize that people have those speaker notes so that when they deliver those handouts, people can read it. I never recommend sending a presentation to people, because then they don't get that whole being presented to experience. You can also send a video of the presentation too, if you think that would help. But mostly I just say, don't send the slides themselves, send either the handouts or send a video of you presenting to that person.
Great, thank you. So how do you handle tough questions or questions that you don't know or you're unsure of?
I tell you, I don't know. Like the question earlier, when I can't remember the phrase, but it was the marketing interview question, where I sort of understood the question, but didn't really. So rather than just say, oh, this is what it is, blah, 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 and someone who actually knew that terminology would say, this girl doesn't know what she's talking about, there are ways to deflect. You can say, I don't know the answer to that question, but if you give me your contact information, I'd be happy to find out for you and get back to you. Or maybe it's an answer that someone in the audience has. And you could deflect by saying, well, I don't have direct experience with that. Does anyone in the audience have any answers that might help? So you can involve other people, but never, ever, ever pretend like you know what they're talking about if you don't. Because then if people see that you're doing that, then the rest of your presentation's shot and people won't believe you're credible anymore.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Are there any last words of wisdom you'd like to leave us with? I know we're getting about to the top of the hour, and any last words of wisdom?
Well, I would say that if you want to continue the conversation, please do ask me questions. I respond very well to phone calls and email. Don't try me on Twitter, because I just pretended to like it because all the engineers I knew liked it. But I am very willing to talk with you, answer your questions. You can sign up for that free 30-minute consultation, and then you can, and that's how to keep it going. Love to hear from you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Laura. This has been an absolutely fabulous presentation. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everyone who attended and kept the chat going and the lively dialogue and the excellent questions, and really appreciate your time today. There's a lot more happening today in the WT2 conference. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your time today and are able to attend some of the sessions this afternoon or evening your time, as well as the keynote speaker at the end of the day, Laura Dern. So thank you so much, everybody, for your support.
Thank you.
Have a fabulous rest of your day. Thank you so much.